In a few years from now, our timelines and reference point will be spoken not in AD and BC, but pre-COVID and post-COVID era. The concept of borders and boundaries has blurred. Vulnerability, anxiety reflects more than ever now. The human spirit is put to test every day, sometimes failing ourselves, sometimes chugging along with the community, and most times hoping we will emerge victorious from this. Hello, and a very warm good morning to all the people from across the globe who have taken time to join this session. My name is Dr. Rama Ramchandran, Director, IWFCI India, and I will be your host and moderator for this session. In these uncertain times, there is going to be a dramatic shift in our habits, renewed focus on health and hygiene, and new rules of socializing will be written. Work-home engagement will never be the same again. While COVID has exposed us to human suffering, global tragedy, economic meltdown, job losses, and pay cuts, it has also opened opportunities for many sectors. COVID has put the spotlight on real-life heroes, which are the healthcare workers, essential frontline warriors. 2020, touted among the corporate halls, bilateral country agreements as the milestone year. However, 2020 has only woken us up to the new challenges and opportunities that we as an individual and as society can mold around. 2020 has put three priorities: importance and non-negotiable aspects of healthcare, driven by technology and strengthened by analytics and supported by infrastructure and innovative entrepreneurship. All this backed by human endurance and the human lives first approach. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we have, besides our very own dynamic founder and international chair of IWFCI International, Ms. Diana Abruzzi from Melbourne, we have with us three eminent visionary personalities from different countries who have anchored the way forward. Dr. Minerva Pillai from California, an admirable entrepreneur, will throw light on entrepreneurship. She deals with wearable technologies. Healthcare will be covered by Dr. Pat Naidu from East Africa, who is with Elma Philanthropies at Kampala, Uganda. Big data and analytics will be covered by Akash Bhatia, who operates from Boston and Mumbai. Today, we will discuss the roadmap for 2020 and the ideas, sectors that have ushered a new dawn. I cannot contain my excitement to take this discussion forward. May I now call upon Dr. Daphne Pillai, our National President, IWFCI India, to address the audience.
Thank you all for being present at the first virtual fireside chat organized by the International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry, India National Chapter. As Rema has just mentioned, and as we all know, COVID-19 has created a new era in our history. While the world has seen pandemics like this before, globalization has increased the reach of this virus, and social media has increased their fear about it. This pandemic has presented all countries with a distinct drop in the GDP, slump in trade, reduced production, and general panic. What can be done when the whole world is faced with a common enemy? Today we have the tools in the area of healthcare, analytics, communication, augmentation to reduce the impact of this virus. Not only has this virus asked existing entrepreneurs to innovate and to make progress around this virus, but it also gives birth to new entrepreneurship and has created a new way for many people to provide healthcare, to devise a new work culture, and to be with their families. It was this light at the end of the tunnel that we saw, and which motivated us to organize this fireside chat event. IWFCI India National Chapter wanted to invite innovators to share their experiences in how COVID 19 has reshaped their businesses, and in some cases, how their businesses can help shape the COVID 19 era. We have met here to discuss our shared experiences, to reduce our fear of the future, and to make plans for tomorrow. And we are very fortunate to have Ms. Diana Abruzzi, the visionary founder and international chair of the International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry, IWFCI. Her dream of empowering women through entrepreneurship and linking them globally has seen the opening of IWFCI chapters around the globe. IWFCI chapters are today in Australia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Mongolia, Singapore, South Korea, Philippines, Myanmar, Nigeria, and the very latest chapter was started in Afghanistan. I now invite Ms. Diana Abruzzi to address the audience.
Thank you, Dauphine, for your kind introduction. I would also like to take this moment to acknowledge Dauphine on her impressive leadership in the growth of IWFCI Australia, and especially recently under handling the COVID-19 impact for her members. Thank you, Dauphine. You're very, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
There is a couple of points I would like to cover, and this is regarding the role of IWFCI chapters in the COVID epidemic. IWFCI is well aware the world is changing as we speak, and acutely aware that there will be businesses that will have to adapt. Therefore, the role of IWFCI is to promote and support women in business, and in doing this, encourages international trade. To this end, we stand with our members throughout our global chapters to assist them in navigating these changes and to come out the other side. This is done through our sisterhood of support, sharing what others are doing to adapt, letting them know that they are not alone, especially in networking for new businesses and the development of their businesses when the time comes. As for the unique role of women in recovery, you really have to look at history, because whenever there is a catastrophe, women are always burdened with a challenge to pick up the pieces and carve out a new path for their families, and often without their men. As a result, many fine qualities of women have been seen to emerge. They have immense capacity for resilience. They are much better at budgeting and financial prudence. They come from a different viewpoint, often able to see the bigger picture better. And most importantly, women have an instinct for survival. From the perspective as the head of a global women's chamber of commerce like IWFCI, I have come to understand and appreciate the strategically important role women play in the success of a nation's economy. But at the same time, fully aware of the constant struggles women face in each culture, in each industry, and in every country. I think it is called being taken for granted, which breeds a lack of respect and gratitude. But I say woe to the country that does not embrace and release the resilient female spirit into their economy. To even get a better picture, the Boston Consulting Group, in a study on female startups, discovered women raised half the amount of capital as men did. Yet women were found to generate twice as much revenue as their male counterparts, with an impressive 10% more accumulative revenue over 5 years. BCG also discovered women, when pitching for investors, were subject to more challenges and pushback than their male counterparts, and questioned more on subjects like their technical knowledge and basic justification. And I thought this was a very interesting point. They also found men exaggerated more than women, with bolder predictions, which seems to resonate better with the male-dominated venture capitalist panels. And lastly, women pitches were mainly based on their personal experiences, which, as you can imagine, was alien to the male-dominated venture capital firms. Now, based on these findings, I would like to touch on the government policies needed for post-COVID recovery. Because if your country wants true prosperity, economic revival, and to generally realize your maximum GDP potential and your national economic policy settings, they need to recognize and respect, firstly, the role of entrepreneurs in a vibrant entrepreneurial culture must be in the play. Secondly, the strategically important role female entrepreneurs will need to play as part of this revival culture. Such policy settings will require lots of juicy carrots and no big sticks. We need incentives to try, not penalties if you fail. The World Economic Forum, WEF, also recently concluded the following policies recommended for government to help their revivals. To this, we have also put our recommendations. Firstly, we need to abolish red tape. It costs billions to administer, and in the process stops the economic initiative and growth that makes more billions. Secondly, reform industrial relations. Now, we know this is a very hot topic, but it needs to be addressed. Excessive enterprise and workplace regulations, not suppressing the entrepreneurial spirit, but to also that also heightens the risk, and as a result stifles any economic growth. Thirdly, cut taxes. Why? Because excessive taxation lower company returns, which discourages anyone from starting a business in the first place. So it seems the message to government is no longer ambiguous. The need for true entrepreneurship and fiscal incentive has never been more clear. Because without commerce, there is no wealth generation. Without income, there is no tax revenue. Without revenue reserves, there are no social services. We have got to wake up. Studies have shown that the key to successful outcomes is not money, connections, and education, but persistence. This is the key. All the rest will naturally play a significant part, but it is the individual that is the key, and their ability to learn, adapt, and push to try again and again. This is why governments can't penalize failure. They must encourage instead resilience, the courage to overcome the fear of failure. Fear paralyzes. We don't want paralysis. We want creative juices to flow. We want the wheels of industry to turn. So in summing up, when you look at the phenomenal impact of entrepreneurial women around the world, you have to realize they are of paramount importance to the recovery of any nation's economy and should have a seat at any strategic decision-making table, because if you build your people, you will build a great nation. I do hope this speech has been of encouragement, and I look forward to hearing from the other guest speakers. Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you, Dinah. Thank you, Dinah. Thank you, Dinah, for those wonderful insights. And as you rightly pointed out, persistence is the key to all of this. We appreciate your global insights, and every word of what you said does resonate for the need of the hour and what needs to be done. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, before we commence the session, let me now introduce you all to our three eminent panelists. We start off with the ladies' first concept. We have with us Dr. Minerva Pillai. Dr. Minerva Pillai received a PhD from University of California, Berkeley in 2014 in the field of mechanical engineering. She went out to co-found SuitX, an exoskeleton company based on her graduate research. She has been awarded 2 small business grants from the United States National Science Foundation to commercialize exoskeleton technology for industrial applications.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our next panelist, Dr. Pat Naidu.
Hi.
Pat Naidu is the Executive Director, Elma Philanthropy Services East Africa Limited. Dr. Pat Naidu is a physician and public health professional with specialist qualifications in maternal, neonatal, and child health. He completed his medical training at the University of Natal Medical School and attained a doctoral degree in public health from the Yale University School of Medicine and an MPH from John Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health, among other qualifications. Dr. Naidu has more than 30 years of global public health experience, having worked in Asia, Latin America, and throughout Africa. He is currently the Executive Director of Elma Philanthropies East Africa, based in Kampala, Uganda, a position that he has held for the last 8 years. Before joining Elma, he led the Global Governance Equity and Health Program at the International Development Research Center, which is called IDRC, in Ottawa, Canada. He has also held the post of Associate Director, Health Equity at the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you, Pat.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and wonderful to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to be able
Akash.
to participate in this fireside.
Yeah, thank you. Akash is the co-founder and CEO of Infinite Analytics. Akash co-founded IA while studying for his MBA at MIT. Prior to MIT Sloan, he co-founded Zooga. Before this, Akash was an engineer with Oracle in Silicon Valley. He has completed his MS from University of Cincinnati and BE from the College of Engineering, Pune.
Thank you, Dr. Ramchandran. Great to be here.
Thank you once again, all you eminent panelists, for being here. And you are going to make this a very fruitful session, and we're all looking forward to this. So shall we start off our question and answer session?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, the first question goes to Minerva. Minerva, you are the co-founder of SuitX. And I do think that wearable technologies is a very innovative field and, a new technology area, which is kind of untraveled. Can you tell us a little more about what SuitX does?
Yes, it would be my pleasure to tell you guys what SuitX does. So at SuitX, we are very, very passionate about building technologies that help people. That's how I like to think of it, at least. And what we specialize in is essentially building exoskeletons, which you can think of them as robots that you wear. And typically, when you think of that, your imagination goes to Iron Man and goes to the Matrix movies and the Alien movies. But that's actually not very close to reality. Reality is much more tangible, actually. We're actively selling products to people. What you should be imagining, essentially, is a frame that somebody can wear, which is a combination of rigid and soft components that can help you walk if you're in a wheelchair, that can help you, do your work better, help you get less tired when you are at a job which has a lot of manual labor involved and you can hurt yourself. I actually have some pictures that I would like to show you. If the moderator can bring them up, I can explain these a bit better. So this is an example of one of the exoskeletons that we developed. So I personally, at our company, I'm in charge of the development of industrial exoskeletons. And so the goal there is to reduce the risk of injuries and reduce worker fatigue when they're doing all sorts of manual labor. The model you see here is what we call our Shoulder X, and it's designed essentially for anybody who is doing overhead work where your arm is above you. What we found, and this is true not just in the United States, but many other countries, that there are 3 regions of your body that are the most likely to get injured and cost companies the most in insurance and indemnity costs. Those are your back, your shoulders, and your knees. This device here is designed essentially to reduce the risk of shoulder injuries. If we can move to the next slide, what I can show you is a device that is designed to reduce the risk of injuries in your lower back when you're stooping forward. So as you can see here, this gentleman is wearing a very simple and minimal frame while bending over and grinding a surface. This device essentially puts a supporting force on your chest so that your lower back bones are under less strain. And then the next device that product that we sell is called our LegX, and that is assisting people in squatting for prolonged periods of time. Essentially, you can imagine it as a chair that walks with you. And then as soon as you need to squat down, so many people have knee problems, this essentially supports your weight.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dr. Minerva. And what I do realize is that your product is a wonderful product, which would be such a boon to the people who work on the shop floors, and also probably people who are injured, people with disabilities, and so on. I think it's going to be a very, very innovative one for the world all round. And I guess the governments and industry must make it work in a most economical manner and affordable manner to make it available to the public at large.
Absolutely.
Yes. So may I now address a question to you, Pat?
Yes, please.
Pat, you come from a country which has handled Ebola and now this pandemic. Are there any learnings from the Ebola crisis and any parallels that you can draw with COVID-19?
Thank you very much again, Rema. And COVID-19 is relatively new, and for many of us, we are faced with how to deal with some of these issues for the first time. Dealing with a pandemic that we are actually making things in terms of treatment and in terms of how we're approaching patient care and so forth, almost on the fly. We are actually building the plane as we are flying it from much of our experience going forward. However, having worked in Ebola for at least three Ebola epidemics here, 2 in Uganda and in West Africa, there are a lot of lessons that for us to be able to glean from this. First and foremost, Ebola is a very different type of disease in the sense that it is very high mortality. Initially in Uganda in the early, in 96, 97, in that epidemic, mortality was in the region of 98%. So in a disease where you have such high mortality, the actual spread of disease happens very quickly and the demise of the patient happens very quickly. And in some sense, there is some level of time-limited spread of a particular disease. In a case of COVID, where you have close to 80-90% of asymptomatic infection, it's likely to be more drawn out, and therefore that in itself has its own particular consequences in terms of how a disease will spread in a community, in countries, and so forth. There's some important lessons for us with respect to our experience from Ebola, both in Uganda and in West Africa. One of the most important lessons right from the outset is be careful. Don't just declare victory too early, because these epidemics have a way of coming back. They have a way in which they're sort of running within our communities. Difficult. It's like a fire that's been constantly lit and difficult. And the moment you lose your awareness and you lose your focus and your attention, the fire can catch again. So we need to be really careful. The other aspect is that combating an epidemic is never easy, not easy. In our African environment, we have fragile health systems, and that in itself, any kind of shock to a fragile health system has devastating consequences on people's lives, on the maintenance of regular health care, on maintaining children's well-being, and looking at how we can go forward in terms of maintaining our health and well-being overall. Again, I think the important aspect here, whenever we approach an epidemic of this nature, and certainly it happened with respect to Ebola, is that we need a coordinated, unified approach that can be in a collaborative way, where we work across sectors. It's not just a health ministry problem. It's generally a problem that transcends all these sectors, and working across different institutions, different organizations, and different agencies. And that's really important. And at the same time, underpinned by very high-level political advocacy and political engagement. That's absolutely critical. The other important aspect, no matter where we are dealing with, and very important lessons from Ebola, and I think some lessons for us to glean with respect to COVID, is being able to mobilize communities and engage community leadership. That's critical, because the communities then getting a sense of what disease awareness is like, getting a sense of how we prevent this any particular disease, getting a sense of what aspects we need to take into consideration to prevent spread and to be able to avoid any kind of infection. So that's really important with respect to mobilizing the communities overall. Also important is that what generally starts off as a health crisis very quickly morphs into a social and economic crisis. And you see that very evidently with COVID. We saw it with respect to Ebola, in the sense that with lockdowns, with decreased international trade, with a hike in food prices, a fall in revenues, these have a broad spread impact on everyday lives and people's households, and ability to be able to provide food and basic living circumstances. So I think very quickly you get that interfacing of a multi-dimensional approach to a crisis, requiring not only within a health ministry or a health sector involvement. So how to be able to galvanize support right across the sectors is really important. And as you pointed out, not only working within the public sector, but also the private sector has an important role to play. With our Ebola epidemic and with some of our experience going forward, from that period of time over the last 10 episodes of Ebola that we faced on the continent here, you need to be able to focus on strengthening health security systems. Many times, whenever you have health budgets generally tend to be the first to be cut whenever there's an impending need for cash within government systems. The second is education, or generally health and education compete with each other for who can get cut the quickest. So I think here again, COVID particularly and epidemics generally say that we can't ignore this aspect anymore. We need to be able to have a concerted focus on how we maintain and strengthen health security systems. We can't let our health systems demise and degenerate. That's at our own peril. And important here is looking at issues of disease surveillance, cross-border surveillance overall, case finding, contact tracing, And important in this process, and particularly in this new era of social media, is looking at the importance of having a mass communication campaign. Good, effective communication is critical. Good communication saves lives. And importantly, in this era of social media, you can have real-time impact. I mean, you guys know this really well, to be able to tailor your message of how to be able to look at what the responses are and where the responses are needed the most. However, sadly, in this social media era, it's a double-edged issue. One, you can have these skills that you're able to deploy almost in real time, which is really amazing. But you're also dealing with a new beast right now, rumors and fake news. And how do we look at stemming the spread of misinformation? And misinformation can be the bane of any form of your prevention strategy or your health impact strategy. So we really need to be able to tackle this issue of misinformation, really combat misinformation almost in the same way that we approach how we combat a virus. So I think we need to be able to keep this hand in glove with the virus and clinical aspects that we are looking at, as well as looking at being conscious of how do we get proper information out there and effective communication overall. This demands that we particularly need to have credible platforms, credible multimedia platforms that are popular, that we can utilize very quickly and rapidly. Also critical in this process, besides having the cadre of health professionals ready to be deployed and to be able to work in various aspects, is how do we have a team of credible health professionals who can combat this aspect of health information, and the responses that they provide are reliable, credible, and are based on evidence and strong information overall, and to be able to get that message out there quickly. In this process, I have two more points, Rema. I hope I'm not taking too much time.
No, please go ahead, Dr. Pat. Yeah.
So as we looking at this, one aspect to take into consideration within our environments and with COVID as well, is to be able to be cognizant of tailoring your approach to the specific context and the cultural norms of a particular area. That's really important. I mean, you see in Italy, where we greet people and we have 1, 2, 3 kisses and greet each other and so forth. And suddenly when you introduce lockdowns and social distancing, all of those norms need to change. And we need to be able to look at it slightly differently. And how do we cope with this aspect? And within an aspect of incorporating the social distance, quarantine and isolation, what strategies do we need to employ? And sadly, in Ebola, we had to deal with very, very specific socioeconomic practice, social-cultural practices, essentially dealing with how we mourn, how we bury our dead. How do we actually do this in a dignified way when there's such high death rates that we faced, 98% death rate early on in northern Uganda here, those things become suddenly very, very important and critical. How we look at safe burial practices are critical for mounting an effective epidemic control program. My penultimate point is looking, I know there's a lot of stuff I'm hoping we can discuss further as we need to, and I'll be happy to look at how to field any of those queries that you may have. Is this issue of food assistance? We're seeing it straight away now. And when you have these lockdowns and high food prices, there's the issue of food security at household level. For many households are faced with this issue. Food security, getting food in the hands of those who need it the most, is really critical intervention. But also from an epidemic control perspective, food assistance also assists the process of looking at how we manage virus spread. One, it helps facilitate sheltering from home. The other aspect, during a lockdown and quarantine, food assistance, bringing food to the door of many of these households, is able to assist and aid in this process of lockdown and quarantine. And really critical in this process is the avoidance of risk and minimizing virus spread. by preventing people having to congregate in markets and other places. So food assistance has taken on this kind of dual role of having essential commodities being placed in the hands of people who need it the most, but also being able to be a part of an epidemic control strategy. And that's critical. Again, I think from our experience in Ebola, as you well know, health systems were devastated in West Africa in the last 2-3 years. Heavy mortality among our health professionals, nurses, and so forth, as well as the general population. And that in itself has had a positive side in tackling COVID. We see in a country like Sierra Leone, amazing preparedness, much better than some much more resource countries, for them to be able to have a disease a prevention and a preparedness plan almost 3 weeks before they had their first case of COVID. That's all thanks to their ability and how they coped within the Ebola crisis. So this has given them the tools to be able to meet some of those needs that they require. Early identification of contacts, early contact tracing, looking at being able to look at an efficient disease surveillance program. And I think that has stood them in really good stead and prepare as they are coping with this new pandemic that's coming across now. So I think there have been some downsides that for us that we can learn from and share from, but we are in a very different circumstance from a regional epidemic versus a global pandemic. And how do we deal with that calls for very special challenges. The important aspect also from history, and my final point, Rema, is we've seen that in our tackling of smallpox, for example, or we look at the Spanish flu as they called it in 1918. Smallpox vaccine, and the big advantage of smallpox is that they had a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine right now for COVID. We don't still have a vaccine that's reliable for across the board for Ebola. So a vaccine is a critical tool, and we saw that with respect to smallpox, that a vaccine was critical in the eradication of smallpox. But the vaccine alone is not enough. So a vaccine was actually developed for smallpox in 1796. However, it took 184 years before smallpox could be eradicated. So we must be ready in tackling COVID, really look at what our long-haul plans are going to be. Looks like we have to be able to learn to live with this virus for a few months more and probably a few years to come. How do we cope with this? What do we need to do? How do we still maintain the business infrastructure and the general infrastructure to continue while still being cognizant and in implementing control programs? Happy to talk more later on as well.
Thank you, Pat. Your views and opinions are really wonderful because your country has been a very resilient country in terms of handling the Ebola, and there have been a lot of learnings. And as you rightly pointed out, Sierra Leone has coped with COVID. They were in preparedness for the COVID-19 much ahead of time. And the other point that you also made is very valid. The health budgets and education budgets can no longer be put in the back burner. They need to, be given the right importance and impetus so that health is given the right importance, and so is education. And the other point that you brought out, which we all agree, is healthcare professionals are not just fighting the pandemic. Also the rumors and the homemade remedies from WhatsApp suggestions. So this is something that I think the whole world is trying to cope with, and let's hope for better times and better results from the vaccine that comes out. Thank you for your inputs, Pat. And now I move on to Akash. Akash.
Hi, Dr. Ramchandran.
Yeah, as the CEO and co-founder of Infinite Analytics, could you please take us through the details of how has this pandemic affected business globally? What do you think is the time frame for recovery?
Sure. I think we all agree globally this is a new normal. Things have changed dramatically. we are not going to see a return back to what things were pre-COVID. Things between, we all agree that, I mean, in fact, everyone that I am speaking with in the entrepreneur circles is that they're not going back to their office spaces. In my company, we started working from home at least 1 month before the lockdown happened in India, and we're working just fine. And so I think that the new normal is going to be more emphasis on productivity while being away. It's also blown the myth of having to work together under one roof. People have figured out a way to be productive while being away from each other. Thankfully, we live in a time where communication is so seamless. We're actually having this fireside chat being in across the globe, from all continents, I would say. And so, people have started to realize that it's not necessary to be under the same roof. In fact, if you look at, Mark Zuckerberg actually and Facebook, I think a couple of days ago mentioned that, they are not going to let people, if people want to work from home for the rest of their employment, they're most welcome to do that. But it's also going to lead to, it's sort of like a seminal moment in history, just like Y2K was a seminal moment in the way people worked, especially in the United States. Y2K followed by 9/11 led to a lot of companies cutting down, girding out their loins and moving a lot of stuff to India. The back office stuff was moved to India. Now, that is going to go all over the globe. It doesn't really need to be region specific. If you look at what Mark Zuckerberg said, was that if you want to work from home for the rest of the year, you're most welcome to. But starting from 1st Jan, you need to tell us where you're working from, and your compensation is going to be sort of proportionally adjusted to the cost of living in your city. And so the companies are preparing for this new normal. So imagine, the cost of living or an average salary in California, in San Francisco, is probably for a developer is about $250,000. Imagine what the salary for an average salary for an equivalent developer in Ahmedabad is, right? It's never going to be close to $250,000. So I think it's going to be a new normal. People are going to, companies are figuring out, how to work in this distributed environment. And it's only good that we are living in this world where it is possible to do this today. This was not possible even 20 years back, the way things are right now. So we should be thankful that, we've been hit with this crisis now rather than earlier. So that's essentially what I feel. We don't see we all know that the vaccine is not going to be here for at least another 18 to 24 months. I'm no healthcare expert, but from whatever I've been reading and listening to people, and in that time frame, people's behavior is going to change. We are not going to be blowing those 3 kisses that Dr. Naidu just talked about. We're going to be not shaking hands as often. And I think a massive catalyst in change in human behavior. I used to take an hour and a half one way to get to my workplace. I don't do that anymore. I get 3 hours of my day now to be able to take care of things that I never was able to earlier. So that's the change we're seeing right now.
Akash, that was lovely. As you rightly pointed out, the new normal is going to completely and radically change the way we work. We have to get used to new work norms, new pay scales, and the way forward. I mean, it's going to be a whole new world of work and home life. Thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. May I now move on to the next question? This question goes back to Minerva. Minerva, how has COVID-19 affected your business?
So COVID-19 has affected our business in many ways. In addition to being, a innovative technology developer, we are also actually a manufacturer of goods, and we are also a seller of goods. And we've been affected in very measurable ways in those fields. And I'll talk about some more in unmeasurable effects as well. But so what we noticed in, because as a manufacturer, we have a supply chain and we get parts from all sorts of different places in the world, including China. And at the beginning of the year, we were actually in the middle of trying to start a product launch. And what we were waiting for is at the beginning of the year, usually every year, is Chinese New Year. And during Chinese New Year, most of our suppliers are closed for about a month. And so now our team, the engineering team is getting questions from all our sales team. When is this product coming out? When is this product coming out? And we're just sitting there waiting for Chinese New Year to end. But then as the Chinese government realized the effect of COVID-19 and the extent of it, they extended out Chinese New Year. And it was uncertain when people would start coming back. People were quarantined. People were not allowed to travel. Like factories were still shut down. And it definitely affected our launch date. But in addition to that, it motivated us essentially to kind of diversify our supply chain even more, where we had at least multiple suppliers in different countries, and multiple suppliers even for like the same product or the same part. Another thing that happened as the COVID-19 spread around the world is, sales get affected. Sudex has customers in more than 40 countries. We have customers in Asia, North America, South America, Australia, Europe, and the company started to pause and pause not only their operations but also their spending. At the same time, travel started to get paused, and travel actually is really, really important for sales teams to maintain customer relationships, introduce customers to new products, and when those things happened, we had to really shift our focus from getting initial sales or our traditional sales to really focusing on remote customer success. Like, what could we do to help our customers out, because we can't go to them? So can we develop tools that actually work for our existing customer base rather than trying to get newer customers? That's interesting because it's the more measurable aspects that affected our company. You can measure how many POs you're getting, and you can measure how many parts you're making. What's not measurable, which is also something I think that all of us are affected by, is your company culture. Now, there are definitely companies, like Akash was saying, where you can actually have people stay at home and work, and that's great. Our company, we can do that to a certain extent, but so much of what we do is I like to think like creative and dynamic collaboration. I work with some of the most talented people in the world, I think. They are people who are passionate about helping others. They are people who really enjoy their work. And when you go into work, they drive you. It's like a perpetual motion machine where you're working really late hours, but it's okay because you really enjoy the company of your coworkers, because they're very, very smart, they're very, very passionate, and they motivate you to be the best that you can be. And that's so much easier when you're with each other. And that, to me, is one of the big challenges of COVID-19, at least for my company that we're working towards keeping the same. It's like, how do you use all of these technology tools like Zoom and Google Meet, any kind of video chatting, to make sure that we're still in contact, we're still collaborating, we're doing it very, very often. But yes, that it's had a really big impact on all of these aspects.
Yeah, thank you for that, Minerva. As you pointed out, you are servicing 40 countries, and that means a huge number of customers. And I have read somewhere that it is easier to manage your existing customers rather than acquiring new customers. So I guess while in the current scenario, it may be a little difficult to acquire new customers, but satisfying your present customers may be the way forward. And your product being such that it's probably a futuristic product, it could probably be the answer to a lot of problems and what shall I say? It could be the answer to a lot of functions at manufacturing units and for medical sector. Thank you for that. May I now address the next question to Pat? Pat, can you please tell me how will the post-recovery look like for the health sector, the challenges and opportunities?
That's a big question, and I'm not sure I know all the answers for that. But I think we're the fact that we've now needing to look at a new way of approaching an infection on a global level, and for many of us, it's a new experience, even though we may have had Ebola and so forth. How do we cope in structures that are traditionally in the public sector, very bureaucratic, and with all its levels of efficiencies and so forth. So how do we? And I think here again, we need to be able to look at multi-sectoral approaches, not just within. This is not just a health epidemic that needs to be dealt with from the Ministry of Health. We need to involve all sectors. So very quickly, you're seeing now when you have lockdown, you need the transport sector. Transport sector is critical as you're able to get food into the country like Uganda, which is landlocked. But however, for a long time now, we've noticed that the truck routes that come from the coast, they become corridors for infection transfer. We saw it with HIV, we see it with Zika, we see it with Marburg, we see it with Ebola. So now how does one work with the transport sector in some coordinated way? And it's many of our health folks don't understand all the machinations and intricacies that go into making sure that you get a good from the harbor to your kitchen table. But what does that mean in terms of ensuring supply lines? Looking at trying to minimize, and this is beyond COVID. During COVID, we need to be able to get quick procurement, fast, getting ventilators, getting personal protective equipment very quickly to be able to circumvent bureaucracy. And traditionally, public sector is not used to being that nimble generally. I'm making a big generalization. There may be exceptions. So I think here again is working in conjunction with private sector is really going to be critical so that we work as one team and be able to build off each other's strengths is really going to be critical going forward. Post-COVID, I think you're already going to see the impact on the tourist industry, airlines. They're going to take a big hit. Traveling, as all of our eminent panelists have spoken about, we're now changing the way we work. There's no need now to go to a big conference, 24 hours away in another country, besides being the tourist attractions that they may be. You can do this right from sitting in your personal home through conferencing and so forth. There's been some talk having to, as we're looking at the post-COVID era, to be able to consider this aspect around immunity passports. Very difficult. Not sure how they're going to apply this, especially in an area where we're not really sure what immunity means in this aspect. The general sense that you get some level of immunity with respect to COVID. However, this is short-lasting. Coronaviruses themselves have become seasonal in some places, especially the earlier viruses. COVID, we are still experiencing how this is going to pan out going forward. And now if you have an immunity passport, how is this going to be applied? Who's going to get the immunity passport? What does this mean? How do we deal with fraud potentially on getting a passport on the side, under the table somewhere? Then what does this actually mean for infection control? Those are really important questions. And then what does it mean for reinfection risks as we're going forward? Importantly, there are some human rights issues to consider. Who gets this passport and who doesn't? How do we apply that? So lot of challenges as we are thinking about going forward. But I think the positive aspects from here, while we are changing our way and while we are looking at social distancing, I think it starts bringing us more into contact with how we relate with each other. No longer are you from the Upper West Side somewhere in some fancy neighborhood. You suddenly have a kind of little bubble that you can situate yourself in separately from others. We're all in the same boat, and we all face the same issues. It's a very humbling experience. It's also a very telling experience, and also importantly, we need to look at your well-being is critical to my well-being too. Therefore, we need to work together to maintain our collective well-being in some way. And I think that in itself is going to be critical to making this world a better place for us, making us look at this infection in a way of how do we become more creative and more cognizant of each other's needs, and what our well-being means in this aspect.
Thank you, Pat, for those insights. And like you say, we all need to work together, not only country specific, but globally we need to work together to handle this crisis. And I'm sure we will come up victorious with that. Thank you for that. The next question goes to Akash. And while I address the next question to Akash, I would request the audiences to please put in their questions if they have any address to any particular panelist. Thank you. Akash, your next question is, how has big data analytics, artificial intelligence risen to this challenge of the pandemic?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think we are thankful that we live in an era, or the pandemic has struck us in an era where data is available. We generate 95% of today's data has been generated in the last 3 years. I would say now it's probably last 1 year. And so essentially artificial intelligence and big data analytics, they go hand in hand. Have played a very critical role, are actually playing a very critical role, right? From whether it is helping the epidemiologists to help with their modeling scenarios. They need a lot of data across different geographies, across the way across the way regions are handling the epidemic, across the way the virus is propagating itself across different regions. All of that data is available, and it's a lot of data. And big data analytics actually helps these epidemiologists with creating these models that can help governments figure out their policies and their sort of tactical measures that they would need to take to address the epidemic. In terms of other aspects, my company deals with a whole lot of mobility data to be able to help governments across India and potentially across the globe as well figure out. Dr. Naidu mentioned contact tracing earlier. Figure out mobility and contact tracing for people who have come in close proximity with infected patients. It also helps governments understand where hotspots can be detected. It also helps them understand how are migrants moving from one state to another. Can something be done to help with increasing the healthcare infrastructure to handle these migrants, and so on and so forth, right? So and this is just my company doing it. There are other companies that are working on helping doing genome sequencing to help with figuring out the vaccine for the virus. And so I think artificial intelligence and big data analytics together form a very core and a very vital component of this fight against COVID, and going forward as well, a fight against every other pandemic that might arise, God forbid. But we know that there will be such viruses that will continue to surface in the future. Then there is aspects of being able to deal with just the data flow from one region to another. Again, that will require in terms of how do you process all the raw data that's been collected? How do you analyze it? How do you take the insights out of those, get them to the right stakeholders so that right decisions can be taken across different regions? And I think, yeah, so to answer your question, it is playing a very pivotal role in helping governments tackle tackle the epidemic, tackle the policies that are required, not just with the pandemic, but also how do you exit from a lockdown? How do you understand which regions to open up, which regions to keep shut until the crisis blows over? I hope that helps.
Thanks, Akash. I recently read a World Health Organization report, which was released last month, and it said that AI and big data are a key part of the response to the disease in China, which talks a lot about the dependability of artificial intelligence as well as big data. I think your products and your inputs have a large role to play in tackling the disease. Thank you for that. My next question goes out to Minerva. Minerva, I would like to ask you this question. How have you adapted your workforce to ensure survival and success?
So I think that a company's success is very tied to your employees' success and to your customer success. And those things will also kind of result in survival. What we had to do very much when this whole thing started, is make sure that our employees had access to video communication, video chatting. They have access to whatever computers that they need. In one case, I think right before the California shelter-in-place went into place, I was literally grabbing computers and giving it to people so that they could take it home. Our accountant could take it home and access QuickBooks from there. We were, making sure that the engineers could remote desktop in so that they could do their CAD software. And because so much of our business and development is on actual hardware, we had to make sure that hardware was available to our engineers to, play with in their houses. So it's like, we have people taking exoskeletons. Like I actually have 2 exoskeletons in my house so that I can test and try different things out. The other thing that we did is start working on resources for our customers to make sure our customers could be trained when we aren't physically present, and creating different tools, education mediums for them. Another thing that I think is really, really important for success is you giving for managers to give more time to their to their team, because what inevitably happens is you've lost that day-to-day contact. People can't just come and talk to you whenever they have a question. So it's our responsibility to make sure that our frequent check-ins with all the people who are working with you, that we're doing ensuring that their well-being is good, but also that all of us are working towards our common goal. And actually, Dr. Naidu, Pat, made this comment, which is, good communication saves lives. And I really believe that good communication saves businesses also. And, that's a really important part of success, to make sure that we're communicating really well with everybody involved so that we're all going, in the same path towards success.
Thank you, Minerva. And I can just imagine when we all work remotely from home, the whole concept of your company work from home option is going to be a lot different when you work with exoskeletons at home. I mean, that could be very, very different, and a tough one at that, I guess. Yeah. Thank you for that. The audiences can please start putting in their questions so that we can address it to the panelists, please. The next question goes to Dr. Pat. Pat, can you please share some of the initiatives of Elma Philanthropies, current and future?
I think part of the focus of Elma essentially is to improve households access to basic services, to look at maternal newborn care programs early on, and to be able to improve educational access for disadvantaged communities. And that has been the large focus, particularly in an East African environment, and has been Elma's focus. And I must add, part of Elma's ethos is that we are essentially anonymous. So we are looking at how we can highlight and bring forward the good work that's being done by various communities in trying to tackle some of these fundamental issues. We still have, in our environments here, we know, all of us know, pregnancy is not a pathological condition, but it can't be taken for granted in our environment. Maternal mortality is still very high, unacceptably high. We still have children dying from basic infectious disease. And now in this environment, when you have an infectious disease lag and an infectious disease void, put on this other issues of health systems that are weak and fragile, you have the building blocks for a disaster. And when you have an epidemic and a shock to a system like we do now, you really are scrambling to be able to get things together. So it becomes very difficult. We have to invest in longer-term strengthening of our health systems as a matter of urgency. We can't just put it in the back burner and hope that it'll happen, or can't just simply, and again, just an example with COVID, whereas previously in Ebola, we had the global community came together within 10 days. In fact, I think it was within 6 days overall for most countries, within 10 days overall. We had almost 150 health professionals on site in the region to be able to assist and provide their expertise. During COVID, you can't travel. During COVID, you suddenly can't move as easily. You have to depend on your local infrastructure. So you have to be prepared to be able to meet the emerging needs almost in an immediate basis. And where do we get that resources from? Similarly, from private sector involvement, we had no sanitizers. How do you get this when the ports are difficult to be able to access, airports are closed, etc. So we had to look at manufacture of sanitizers locally for the first time. We should have done that before. Everything was coming from other countries in China and elsewhere. All of a sudden, we need to look at building infrastructure locally. And that, I think, in the long term will be beneficial to us because we will have that infrastructure ready for what we are looking at and where do we need to go. The other aspect that we really need to be able to think about is trying to establish how we're going to have to live with this virus. I get a feeling we have to live with this virus for at least many more months to come, probably more. How do we manage? How do we keep things going while we're still having to cope with this aspect of social distancing, infection control, prevention of spread? So that would need us to be able to look at how we really cope with moving forward and coexisting with this virus going forward. We need to have a vaccine. So again, we need to work together to be able to put all our resources together to be able to make sure that we have an efficient vaccine in place. Vaccines don't come very quickly. I mean, we're trying to fast track in various places globally. It normally takes 18 to 24 months at fastest to be able to get an efficient vaccine, ready for rollout. Then there's the logistical aspect of rolling out billions of doses of vaccine. And if you need 2 doses of a particular vaccine or 2 doses certain months apart, how does that cope to try and maintain supply? Where do we actually look at? So the question coming back for people at ELMA and other organizations, the Gates Foundation and so forth, is to be able to look at how do we adapt our strategies, our focus, our aspects that we are looking at to be able to aid and assist this fast tracking while not putting people's lives at risk. There's always the aspect of risk that we need to be able to be cognizant of, and how do we take that forward? From a simple perspective, and I'm excited to hear Dr. Minerva and Dr. Akash and of all the exciting work that you're doing. We're still dealing with basic personal protective equipment, getting that to where we need to. getting the mask, getting the N95 mask and all the gowns that we need when we're dealing with the biosafety level 3 and 4. Actually, when you're working in a hot climate, very quickly, if you start perspiring in our summers that we have beyond the equator, if you sweat a little bit, you quickly compromise biological safety. How does one work on this? Being able to work on a tiring long day and then suddenly trying to get back. How do you disrobe from these various protective equipment that you have? What's the safety protocol? And then you have to go home. What's the risk that you present to your families then? So I think these are things that we are looking at. From an ELMA perspective, again, one of the questions that we are dealing with now, this COVID has become a preoccupation for all of us throughout the world. However, the world still has to move on. Children still need to be vaccinated. Pregnant mothers still need to be able to access healthcare. HIV patients need to be able to get their drugs on time, and they can't miss their drugs. What we are finding, there are gaps emerging from all of this. People are afraid to come to the health centers. How does this affect our regular operating for primary healthcare services? So we are starting to see difficulties now, and you are seeing it also even in some of the other infections. When we have diabetes or hypertension, being able to access your drugs. We have people who need cancer care, early recourse to cancer care. So it's not only the children and the mothers; it's also right across the spectrum. So how do we then adjust and adapt to be able to make sure we provide those essential services while we're still maintaining vigilance and still tackling all these aspects about the pandemic? I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for us. And I think as we're seeing forward, how do we cope? Do we be able to get our health system more nimble and more approachable, as well as more responsive to the cares that we need to face? And I think exciting challenges, difficult challenges, nothing's easy. But I think here again, we can learn from our global colleagues and the global community at large.
Thank you very much for that, Pat. I know ELMA Philanthropies are doing path-breaking work, and I wish you all the very best to ELMA to progress with the work, particularly given the current scenario and times that we are in. Francis, can I ask you for the questions, if there are any on the screen, please? Francis? Okay, we have a question here. When you think all these lockdowns will be over and we could move around freely without fear of catching the virus, can this question go to Akash, please?
Sure. I think it's going to be a gradual exit from the lockdown. I don't think there is going to be one date where the lockdowns are going to be lifted. In fact, I know of cities and state governments across India, at least, where they're looking at different zones within a city, which are either complying with the lockdown conditions or are not complying. And those that are not complying are going to have an extended lockdown period, and the ones that are complying are going to sort of see an exit, a gradual exit from the lockdown. And it's essential for cities and states to do this, primarily because I think 2 months of a lockdown is enough of an economic hit that anyone can take. We are still fine, but there are lots of other people out there, especially blue-collar workers and people who need to get to a location to get their work done, and they need to get out of this lockdown. And so I think we will see a graduated exit, depending upon the area that you live in and how well you're complying with the lockdown conditions.
Thank you, Akash. Okay, there is a question to Diana. What is the role of a corporate or an individual needs to take immediate action at such a tough and difficult period that affects our personal and professional life, that affects our individual's physical, mental, and emotional health? What's your actionable advice? that we take within our control? Any insight or advice from you?
Well, I think we always have to look our way forward. This is terribly important. We know what has just happened. Now we need to know what we do now. And the question is very relevant. One of the very serious things is, and I was listening to Akash actually, who said that we will be working from home more and more and more. And I believe within Australia, we have so many SME businesses who actually work from home right now. But what is not there for them, we need then to design our homes though they become like a biz home. We also, and because people are social people, human beings are social, and we definitely need a place where they can actually meet and in their communities. They're called hubs, but they also need to be where they can hire a room or they can hire a boardroom or something along that line. Now, this is moving forward because I believe our suburbs in Australia will become more communities. Because if you work from home, you're going to be looking at what's in your area that can help you buy your materials that you need, and your social outlet will become, our communities will become more, or our suburbs will become more like communities. For us to go forward, we have to, as I said in my speech before, government has to play their part, because there are many people, entrepreneurial people, that have been cut off from really taking that risk, because government has tied them up with so many rules and regulations that it is just virtually impossible sometimes to get even through the paperwork. That is the first thing we need to address, and government needs to address this straight away. Secondly, I think we need to say, start setting up our home offices, but we do need that social interaction. We are no different from the animals. They like to have their couples and pairs and people and so forth. We're no different. We are social people. We like people. We like to hug people. We like to have our social time together. And I believe that we need to now address this going forward. And even though we may not have a lot of things in place, we can now, even between where I am up here in Woodend, we're having communities, and they're becoming so much more inactive, or active now, I should say, not inactive, active. And we need to be looking at that sort of thing. I really feel this is our way forward. We need to work together, because together we can come up and help each other find new markets. We can help people in new technology. There's so many ways forward that we're going to go. So please, I want you to, first of all, let's start getting government to actually address the needs to support business, because without business, we don't have an economy.
Thank you, Dinah, for that. There's one question that has come. Minerva, may I address this question to you? What is the first thing the panelists want to do after the lockdown is lifted?
It's like personally or professionally. I think that either way. I think either way. So like what Akash said, right? This is not going to be. It's not going to be like somebody turning on the light. In California, the governor of California keeps making this analogy that what this is going to be is a dimmer switch. You're going to be slowly, turning the light back on, and then if we see something's changing, we'll turn it back off. So the lockdown being lifted, I think, just means that we need to be very prepared to figure out how we can get back to work to be efficient and successful, but also to keep everybody who we work with safe, right? I really wish that as soon as the lockdown ends, that I can throw a big barbecue and bring all of our employees in and celebrate. But I think that it will be a very gradual process, and the first thing we'll do is, and it'll happen before, is create the plan for bringing people back to work, making sure that we can do it safely, and then kind of slowly, as things get better, I think that, there'll be this new normal, but making sure that we are all taken care of socially, to Diana's point, and professionally will be like our key focus.
Thank you, Minerva. Due to paucity of time, I am unable to take any further questions. So we now come to the concluding talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, what a truly enriching hour this was. Interacting with great minds, enriching perspectives, symbiosis of ideas and expertise, and invested audiences. I am so much more richer in terms of knowledge and emerging out of this session much stronger. I am sure every representative on this session feels the same. We have just listened to the Vice Council and opinions from our August panelists on a new perspective post-COVID. How long will it take the world to get back to normal is a moot point with several different theories. Some say 1 year, some say 2 years, and very many say we need to learn to live with COVID. Irrespective of all these different opinions, one issue that comes out clear is that women force now have an increased responsibility to their personal and domestic environments. They will now have to strike a balance between home and work. Thank you, Dr. Daphne Pillai, for championing this session. Without your support and guidance, this would not have been possible. This session was motivating, eye-opening, and so much more positive, all thanks to the speakers from various regions and continents, diverse backgrounds, and experts in their own fields. Each of your opinions, guidance, and path has brought renewed optimisms during these uncertain times. Thank you to the very many participants who have enthusiastically participated in this session. Last but not the least, those who work behind the scenes. Francis, for providing us all the technical support and guidance and to make this a seamless session. I look forward to engaging and catching on the next big trend and riding the next wave. Have a great day, stay home, stay safe. Before concluding, I would like to end this session on a positive note with a quote from the well-renowned and respected Ratan Tata, who says, irrespective of the various opinions and views, the depth and prowess of human motivation and determination remains untapped. We will therefore come out of this crisis victorious and the economy will bounce back. May I now invite our International President and founder of IWFCI, Diana Abruzzi, and our National President, IWFCI India, Dr. Daphne Pillai, for a final screen roundup with our panelists. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Done.